Welcome to another episode of True Crimes and Weird Times. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Kim.
And today, in honor of scary movie season, we're going to discuss some scary movies and the true stories they were inspired by. I'm going to go over the haunted ones.
And I'm going to do all the serial killer murdery ones. Not all of them, just one.
Just one.
One in particular.
Okay, now if you haven't seen any of these movies that we're going to talk about today, I suggest you either watch the movies first or, you're already here, so listen to the podcast first and then go watch the movies.
There's really only two options.
Yeah.
Do one of them.
That way you can get a sense of what Hollywood's embellished, what the differences were versus what the true story actually was.
Like reading the book and then watching a movie.
Yeah, but I hate doing that. It makes
You'd rather
me mad.
watch the movie first?
No.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't know, because I get pretty mad after I read the book.
I actually prefer watching the movie first and then reading the book, so I'm not as angry about how bad the movie is compared to the book.
I'm looking at you, lovely bones. Percy Jackson. Anyway, so the movies I'm going to go over today is The Conjuring.
Never seen it.
Amityville Horror.
Never seen it.
And The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
I have watched that one. I'm not a big horror movie person just because I have panic attacks, and those are not great for someone who does that.
These are your hosts for your True Crime and Paranormal podcast.
Right.
So let's dig into the very first one, which is The Conjuring. Now, it was based on the Perron family haunting, which Ed and Lorraine Warren had their hand in. They are big-time paranormal investigators, or were. Lorraine Warren claims that the events that took place in the movie are pretty much what happened. She said that she didn't let the directors take any extra liberties unless it was necessary for the film to move on. You know how movies go.
So the paranormal investigator is the one who's in charge of how much spooky stuff happens?
She helped with the movie big time.
So she definitely wouldn't make it more dramatic to help her reputation as an investigator.
Kim.
Yeah, you're right. People don't do stuff like that.
In January of 1971, the Perron family, which included Carolyn and Roger, the mom and dad, and their 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, moved into their brand new to them 14-room farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island.
14 rooms.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Holy cow.
I don't know what you do with 14 rooms.
Hire a maid.
And according to them, it didn't take very long for the strange things to start happening, as scary movies do. It started small. A broom would go missing. Other items around the house would move around. You'd find them somewhere else in a different room. Carolyn said she could hear the sounds of scraping on her kettle in the kitchen when no one was there, which is super gross and spooky.
Scraping on her kettle?
Like I picture just like a metal kettle and just like nails scratching on it.
Oh.
Let me sound effects.
Yeah. Hang on, I have big nails. I can see if I can.
Yeah. Ew. It's so gross it hurts my teeth. Anyway, she would also find piles of dirt in the floor where she had just slept.
That's just rude.
That is rude, and I don't like that at all. The girls also began to notice spirits around the house. They say for the most part they were harmless, but there were some that were considered angry. According to Carolyn, she actually did some research on the house after all of these things started taking place, and she found that it had belonged to the same family for 8 generations. That's a lot of people going in and out of this house.
That's a very... How old is this house?
I want to say it was built in the 1800s. That's about right. But I can't remember the exact date.
I mean, it'd have to be for 8 generations.
Yeah, it was an old house. Many of those family members had actually died under mysterious circumstances. Mysterious circumstances.
Oh, like creepy ones?
Like creepy, I guess. Several of the children drowned in a nearby creek. One was actually murdered in the house, though I couldn't find a lot of information on that one. And a few had actually hanged themselves in the attic.
Sounds like this was a very sad family.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe it's because it was the 1800s. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happens when you don't have Wi-Fi.
I mean, I guess they lived through the Great Depression, which was a pretty bad time. It was called the Great Depression.
That was in the 1930s.
Yeah, but like...
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, they would have gone through that. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not stupid.
You're not stupid. Andrea Perrin, who was the oldest of the children, later recalled that her mother's research was valid because, quote, virtually every entity we were able to name had, as living beings, either died by their own hand or died so traumatic a death and so sudden a death that they didn't seem to know they were dead. So I guess they were able to name these ghosts that they saw in the house. And it was the people who had died mysteriously in the house.
Oh, okay.
So, now, the spirit that was actually depicted in the film The Conjuring, and the one that Carolyn in real life had considered her nemesis, was named Bathsheba. Bathsheba.
Bathsheba?
Bathsheba. Well, my southern accent is not going to correct that. Bathsheba. The family were convinced that it was Bathsheba's spirit that was tormenting them. She was the angry one. Andrea was quoted as saying, whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be the mistress of the house, and she resented the competition my mother posed for that position. Turns out that there really was a Bathsheba Sherman who lived on the property during the mid-1800s. There were rumors that Bathsheba was a Satanist. She was rumored to have killed a child for a satanic sacrifice. But those are also rumors. But it didn't help that 3 out of 4 of her children died at a very young age.
Oh, that's really sad, though.
Yeah, it is sad. And it was the 1800s. Kids died very early a lot. She had been charged for manslaughter in real life of a child. But the charges were dropped, and we all know how rumors start from there. So we don't really know what happened to the child. While most of the Perrin family had dealt with Bathsheba's spirit in some form or other, Carolyn seemed to encounter her the most. She dealt with her the most. The spirit would lash out at her, issue verbal warnings. She would sometimes show herself and just say them herself.
Oh.
So she wasn't scared of Carolyn. She also seemed to have a bit of a crush on Roger, the dad. She would touch him inappropriately, which I think is funny, honestly. I'm sorry.
Where did the ghost touch you?
She was extremely jealous of Carolyn, and at one point appeared to Carolyn screaming, get out, I'll drive you out with death and gloom. And she would also enjoy slapping and punching Carolyn on many occasions. According to Andrea, who again was the oldest daughter, they also experienced some other things around the home besides just Bathsheba. They would smell rotting flesh. They would raise the beds from the floor. And while the family tried to avoid the cellar, the heating equipment would fairly mysteriously, or probably not very mysteriously because it's an old house.
Yeah.
It would sometimes mess up and Roger would have to go down there. And Roger would sometimes complain of feeling a cold, stinking presence behind him. But everyone feels that going down a cellar, I think. I do.
I mean, I don't particularly like cellars.
I don't like going down them. The Perrins, of course, they'd finally had enough. This is their house, by God. So they enlisted the Warrens' help. Ed and Lorraine Warren. After the extensive investigation into the Perrins' claims and the property's history, the Warrens had actually come to the conclusion that the spirit of Bathsheba wasn't satisfied with just haunting the family, but she had actually tried to possess the body of Carolyn.
And Carolyn didn't notice?
That's where I'm confused. Or maybe she was trying to possess her. Finally, at one point, Lorraine conducted a seance to try to contact Bathsheba and the other spirits. The movie actually shows Ed performing an exorcism instead of a seance, but this is what I was talking about. Lorraine insists that they would have never attempted one. This is where Hollywood embellishes it.
Okay.
Because they have to be performed by a Catholic priest.
Also, if she hadn't actually possessed her, they wouldn't need an exorcism.
Well, during the seance is when she had supposedly possessed her.
Okay.
And if I'm remembering correctly, that is why they had the seance in the movie.
Was because it was possessing her?
Was because she was possessed by Bathsheba.
Okay.
But I've also heard some conflicting ones that during the seance is when she became possessed. So, I don't really know. But either way, Carolyn was possessed. She was speaking in tongues. She was rising from the ground in her chair. Andrea claims to have secretly watched the seance. I'm assuming, you know, how kids are. They sneak around the corner.
They peek in the door.
Right. She's quoted as saying, "I thought I was going to pass out. My mother began to speak a language not of this world and a voice not her own. Her chair levitated and she was thrown across the room." And if I'm not mistaken, again, in the movie, she's like tied up. So her and this chair could go flying easily if that's really what happened.
Yeah. Also, that sounds really painful. Can you imagine being thrown and having no way to brace yourself? Just hitting.
Well, I'm sure Carolyn didn't know because she's possessed. Of course, because of the seance, everything that's happening, Roger was infuriated. He kicked the Warrens out of his home because he was afraid of his wife's mental stability. I mean, he just
understandable.
He just saw all of this happen. Due to financial reasons, they actually lived in this farmhouse until 1980. They lived in it for, I believe, 10 years. Maybe 9 years. So they moved in at 1971.
Oh, wow.
So they lived with all of this going on. When they did finally move, I believe the family moved to Georgia. Ayo.
Hey, guys.
But they claim that some of the spirits actually attached to them and moved with them.
Well, that's terrible.
Yeah. They couldn't even get away.
I wish I didn't know that could happen.
And they have been somewhat haunted ever since, but probably not nearly as bad as they were in the farmhouse.
Yeah, I guess less haunted is better than super haunted.
Yeah. I'll take the lesser. All right. The next one we're going to talk about is Amityville Horror. We've all seen it except Kim, apparently.
Yeah, everyone in the world but me.
On November 13th, 1974, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot his mother, father, and 4 siblings to death at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York.
See, I actually do know the crime part of it.
I figured you would know the crime part.
It's the haunting I haven't looked into.
13 months later, the Lutz family purchased the home for just $80,000 because, well, that's not the right word. I was going to say fortunately for them. It's a murder home, but it's really not fortunately for anyone. But that's why they got it so cheap. But they only stayed in the home for less than a month, for 28 whole days. Now, they originally blessed the house by a priest the day they moved in, because, I mean, a family was brutally murdered in the home just a year before. I would probably do the same thing.
Good precaution to take, I guess.
Burn some sage. Now, according to the Lutz family, the priest said that he had been slapped by an unseen hand. He heard a voice telling him to get out. He then became ill with flu-like symptoms, and his hands began to bleed. Clearly, that didn't seem to bother the Lutz family, because they moved in anyway.
I mean, I probably wouldn't, but...
I just bought the house, too, so...
Yeah.
You can't really back out.
There's probably not a "this house is haunted" clause in the signing papers.
Then, of course, obviously, they start noticing weird stuff happening. You know, who saw that coming?
Probably the priest.
Probably the priest. They claim to begin smelling foul odors, hearing sounds. Their home would stay extremely cold the entire time. Basic haunted house stuff.
The norm.
They also said they found strange green gelatinous drops on the carpet when they woke up every morning. That's not so normal, I guess.
I'm just picturing snot.
Oh, gross.
Oh, the ghost had a cold.
Oh, it was cold in the house. The ghost had a cold. You're right. George Lutz, who was the father of the family, claims that his wife would be physically changed into an old woman with hair, wrinkles, and a face of a 90-year-old woman. He also claimed that, and this part is actually in the movie, he also claimed that he would mysteriously wake up every morning at 3:15, which was allegedly when DeFeo carried out the murders.
3 is also like the witching hour, right?
Yeah, and here's the thing. When I wake up at 3 o'clock, I try to go to sleep before 3:15 every time because of this movie.
Just in case.
Just in case. One night, George also claims that he heard the children's beds slamming up and down on the floor. He said he was immobilized in his own bed, and he couldn't do anything to get up or help them. And then I guess he just fell back asleep. Because later that night, he says he woke up again to find his wife levitating and moving above the bed. That time, I don't know if he was immobilized. I don't know what he did.
I mean, what do you do? Do you try and pull her back down?
I would pretend I'm asleep. That's what I'm going to do. Until the sun comes up.
Honey, you okay up there?
What you doing? Can you bring me some water when you come by? Naturally, and this is where I say, if this is true, this family was super smart, because the next day they left the house. They left all their belongings. There was clothes, furniture, food in the fridge. They left it all and just gone. So before anything else could happen, they left.
Yeah, I mean, if my spouse was levitating off the bed, I'd probably get out too, yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be my breaking point. Now, my girl, Lorraine Warren, also worked with the Amityville house. And just 2 months after the Lutzes moved out, a group of psychic researchers gathered at the home to investigate. I read an article where they called this a psychic sleepover. Lorraine claims to have had, quote, an overwhelming feeling of horrible depression in the house. The researchers also took a series of time-lapse photos in the upstairs landing of the house. None of the other photographs showed anything out of the ordinary except one, which seems to have shown the face of what looks like a little boy, which a lot of people say looks like one of the DeFeo children. And I will share that on our Instagram and Facebook.
Ooh, that one's creepy.
Yeah, it is a creepy picture. I've seen it. Of course, we all know what happens next. The Lutz family goes on to have a book and a movie deal. The story becomes famous, blah, blah, blah. You know. But when the film version of the story released in the 70s, the original, William Weber, who was DeFeo's former defense attorney, actually went to the press and said that he and the Lutzes had made up the story. Weber claimed that they came to him to discuss the DeFeo murders and their haunting so that they could kind of add that to the book, because what's a good ghost story without murder? And they had a few bottles of wine and they started talking, and he actually started helping them embellish their story for the book and the movie. So like the green slime was part of it. I think some of the flies in the movie was embellished. Now, George Lutz does admit that some of this was an embellishment, but he does insist that the family did have supernatural experiences, and the book and the movie were based on the true story of their stay in the home. He denies making any of it up. He says that if they had, they would have come up with a better story. I
mean, it's a pretty good story, though.
Yeah. They wouldn't have fled their house. They wouldn't have left their belongings there. But he says, quote, people are entitled to call the story a hoax if that's what they think. I can't tell them what to think. I can just say what I experienced.
I mean, if it was a hoax, it's a pretty
good hoax.
Good hoax. I mean, you're going to get all your money back. I wouldn't worry about leaving my belongings if, you're going to get all that money back.
Well, think about it. The movie's been redone. Well, I think it was redone once, but it's a story everybody knows.
Right. They have
the house is famous.
Still getting money for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty genius way to do it.
I think they got away with that if it's a hoax. Okay, now my last story is going to be based off The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
I've seen this one.
And this movie is actually pretty loosely based on the true story. It's about a girl named Annalise Michael. She was born Anna Elisabeth Michael on September 21st, 1952 in Leibelfing, Bavaria, West Germany. She was born to a devout Roman Catholic family, and she actually grew up devoutly religious, and she would go to Mass 2 times a week, every week. Her friends and schoolmates said that she was pretty devout, so, and that's important in just a second. Now, at the age of 16, Annalise blacked out at school, and she walked around dazed. She didn't remember it, but her classmates say that she walked around as if in a trance. It was pretty strange, but, it's a one-time thing. It happens. A year later, though, she experienced a similar occurrence. She woke up in a trance. She wet her bed. This time, however, her body went into convulsions, and it caused her to shake uncontrollably, as convulsions do.
It kind of sounds more like seizures to me than anything.
Well, after this one, she decided, hey, I should probably go see a neurologist.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
Yeah. The neurologist diagnosed her with a temporal lobe epilepsy.
I should be a doctor.
Which causes seizures, loss of memory, experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations. It can also cause Geschwind syndrome, which is marked by hyper-religiosity.
Religiosity?
That's the word. Thanks, Kim.
Anytime.
Now, they prescribed her medication. She was taking her medication, but it didn't really seem to help. When I was researching, she kind of went through several medications. She was taking different ones to see what would help, but none of them were working. And I don't remember all the names, but, I mean, I've been there. Not for epilepsy, but,
Yeah, trying different medicines to see if something will help you with something. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think most people go through that at some point in their life.
Now, this isn't helping. She starts seeing the face of the devil everywhere, which is terrifying enough.
Yeah.
She said she could hear demons whispering in her ear. There's the auditory and visual hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
They would tell her she was damned, she would rot in hell, and this is all while she's praying. So, probably not helping your prayers very much.
Right, yeah.
So, of course, naturally, because of all of this, she thinks she's possessed. I would probably too.
I mean, yeah, if your medicine's not working.
You see the devil, you hear what you think are demons telling you that you're going to rot in hell.
I'm sure it all seemed very real to her.
Yeah, oh, of course.
Yeah.
This is her experiencing it. Now, she tried to find priests who would perform an exorcism on her. They all refused. They told her, look, this is something you need to seek medical help on. We don't think this is demons.
Yeah, I've heard that it's actually pretty hard to get a priest to do an exorcism. Like,
Yeah,
they have to go through a lot of checking out before they'll do it.
Yeah. Now, of course, they also had to find a bishop who would do it. She's not necessarily going to bishop. She's just talking to our local priest, it seems like. Of course, she still believes she's possessed. She started ripping off her clothes. She would compulsively perform 400 squats a day.
Holy cow. Talk about leg day.
I know. She had some muscles, I'm sure. There's an instance where she crawled under a table and barked like a dog for 2 days. She would eat spiders and coal. She bit the head of a dead bird.
Oh.
Yeah. She licked her own urine off the floor. Then she started to become intolerant of Christian sacred places, church, and objects such as a crucifix. There was an instance where her family said that she couldn't look at a picture of Jesus.
So my question at this point is, like, why are her parents not getting her more help? Like,
Well,
I'd be
yeah,
checking my child into some kind of hospital or something.
Yeah, they would be in a facility. We'd be looking at doctors.
Instead, they're like, let's find a priest.
Yeah, my kid's not looking at Jesus. I think she's possessed too.
She's having all these symptoms for the medical diagnosis we got her already.
Yeah.
It's probably possession.
Yeah. Well, they finally find a priest who also believed she was possessed. She wrote to Ernst Alt, who's the priest, quote, I am nothing. Everything about me is vanity. What should I do? I have to improve. You pray for me. Alt then petitioned the local bishop, who was Bishop Joseph Stungel, who eventually approved the request. He granted a local priest, Arnold Renz, to help with the exorcism, but he ordered them to do this in secret.
Probably because the church wouldn't approve of it.
Probably. And think about it. Other people, like neighbors and stuff, they would probably go to their priest and say, hey, we got some weird stuff going on over here.
Yeah.
So they just probably didn't want them to know about it. These priests, over 10 months, performed 67 exorcisms on Annalise.
Holy cow.
They lasted about 4 hours each, 2 times a week. So this girl is really going through it. She would be tied down. They're performing all this stuff on her. And
at no point in time did they say, hey, 67 exorcisms later, maybe she's not possessed?
Probably not working. I don't know. I guess not. Maybe they were just really convinced they could get this out of them, or they were just determined not to give up. Through these exorcisms, Annalise revealed that she believed to be possessed by at least 6 demons. Here they are. Lucifer, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Judas Iscariot, I can see that. Adolf Hitler.
In demon form?
I guess so.
Okay.
Cain. Nero. That's a strange one for me.
I don't know that one.
Nero was actually a Roman emperor. He was known for tyranny, debauchery. He was
just a bad guy.
Just a bad guy. And the 6th one was a disgraced priest named Fleischmann. And I'm not entirely sure about him. I didn't look him up. I know it's not funny, but I picture it. These demons inside of her would fight over power of her body. And I just picture a bunch of demons.
Like shoving each other out of the way. No, my turn.
But they would communicate through her mouth with a low growl. If you go on YouTube, all you have to do is look up her name. And the first thing that pops up is her exorcism. And you can hear her talking, and it's so creepy. Like, it does not sound like her voice.
Ooh.
Well, I take that back. It sounds like her voice, but like more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like something you could make up. Again, I know it's silly. I know it's bad to laugh. But the demons argued with each other, like I mentioned, with Hitler saying, quote, "People are stupid as pigs. They think it's all over after death. It goes on." And then Judas would fight over her mouth and say, "Hitler was nothing but a big mouth who had no real say in hell."
Don't listen to that guy. He's a loser.
Now, throughout all these sessions, Annalise would frequently talk about, quote, dying to atone for the wayward youth of the day and the apostate priests of the modern church. Which makes me wonder if she thinks she's supposed to do this. And actually, in the movie, you know, doesn't she talk to Mary? And she's telling her, you're helping these people to see that demons are real, right?
I don't remember, honestly. It's been a long time since I watched it.
It's been a long time since I've seen it, too. But I think at the very end, she's talking to Mary, and she tells her that you're doing this to help other people see that this is real. Now, I could be wrong about that. But maybe that's what she's thinking. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Again, after 10 months, Annalise begins to slowly stop eating. And, of course, she eventually died of malnutrition and dehydration on July 1st, 1976. She only weighed 68 pounds. She suffered broken bones and ripped tendons, which was caused from her constant praying on her knees.
Oh, my gosh.
She was unable to move by the time she died, and she was said to have contracted pneumonia, which, I mean, she's only 68 pounds. Her immune system has to be crap.
Yeah.
After her death, and this is part of the movie, an investigation took place, and the state prosecutor stated that Annalise's death could have been prevented even just 1 week before she died had they sought medical attention.
This is insane. Like, your child is going through a medical condition.
Yeah.
Epilepsy. And instead of getting her help, they call priests in to do endless exorcisms that aren't working.
Yeah, even if you wanted to do the exorcism, still go see a doctor.
Yeah, like have a doctor keep tabs on her at the same time if you want to do your exorcisms. Like, don't let your child die because you won't take her to a doctor.
Now, granted, this is Annalise refusing to eat. It's not just because, but still.
I mean, they can do feeding tubes.
Yeah, they can hook her up to stuff.
Yeah.
In the same year as her death, the state charged Annalise's parents, as well as the priests Ernst Alt and Arnold Renz, with negligent homicide.
Good.
Yeah. Annalise's body was then exhumed. The tapes of the exorcism were played for the court. The state actually recommended that no parties were to be jailed, especially her parents, because they had, quote, suffered enough.
I mean, I disagree, but okay.
Yeah. The priests were actually charged with manslaughter and jailed for 6 months with 3 years probation.
Wait, why were the priests charged but not her parents? I feel like the parents have a greater responsibility than the priests
There
here.
was, the way I read it, and I could be wrong because I don't know German law, that is actually part of their law, which is if they've, quote, suffered enough, that is their punishment.
So it doesn't mean they're not guilty. It just means they don't need any more punishment.
Right.
Gotcha.
That's how I took it. So, was Annalise really possessed? Or was it just an unfortunate case of a misdiagnosed psychological issue?
That one.
Yep.
It was that one. My story today is about Danny Rolling, also known as the Gainesville Ripper. He was the inspiration for the movie Scream, actually.
Yes, I love that movie so much.
But however, as often is the case, the true story is way more horrific than the movie. Daniel Harold Rolling was born May 26, 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana. He had a pretty terrible childhood, actually. His father was extremely abusive. He was a former police officer. He'd been in the military. He had PTSD and a whole other host of mental problems. And he would beat his family. He would degrade them regularly. And this all started for Danny himself at age 1 for
God.
apparently crawling incorrectly, and his father beat him for it. Yeah. And while his mother repeatedly tried to leave the marriage, I'm talking over and over, for years she would leave, staying away as long as 6 months at a time and always coming back. She just couldn't get away from this guy.
Yeah.
And side note, it is so easy to be on the outside of an abusive relationship and say, why would someone ever go back to that? But abusive relationships are really complex, and the victims are often made to feel isolated and just totally dependent on their abuser. They also may be afraid that if they leave, the abuser will kill them or kill their children. So it sounds really crazy to a lot of people, but I promise you, she was not choosing abuse.
The fact that she even wanted to leave
Right.
showed that she wanted to get out.
In fact, it got so bad at one point that she attempted suicide and was committed to a mental institute. Anyway, back to Danny, though. He got pretty into music as a teenager. He got a guitar when he was around 11 years old. And that was kind of his outlet. That's what calmed him. That's what he focused on. But it didn't keep him out of trouble. He was still a very troubled kid growing up in this environment. He got caught committing several robberies. He got caught doing some peeping Tom stuff.
Oh.
And that was just the only time he got caught. According to an article in the Sarasota Herald Tribune, Danny would spend hours each week peeping in windows and masturbating.
Yikes.
Yeah. He went on to join the Air Force, but at this point in his life, he's just very damaged, and he starts using drugs and just doing a lot of things that you should not be doing in the military.
Yeah.
And this eventually gets him discharged. Now, it's an honorable discharge.
Oh.
But they did take away one of his stripes, and,
Okay.
you know, they kicked him out, but they didn't give him a dishonorable discharge. And now he was only 19 years old at this point. He's already joined the military, started drugs, gotten kicked out, been arrested several times. And once he's out of the Air Force, he attempts to live a normal life. He gets really involved in a church. He gets married in 1974. And he even has a daughter. But as most of us know, abusive behavior can be a cycle in families.
Yeah.
So it's not too long before Danny's inflicting the same types of abuse on his wife that his father had inflicted on his mother.
Yeah.
Danny's wife divorces him just 4 years into the marriage because of this abuse.
Well, yeah.
Takes, restraining orders out against him. Tells the police that he's threatened her life. He held a gun to her head. He's threatened to kill her.
Yeah.
So she gets away from him, takes her child, and Danny is just devastated at this point. But he doesn't handle this the way that you and I would handle being devastated. What Danny does is he finds a woman who resembles his now ex-wife and rapes her.
Oh.
Now, the entire 10 years of the 80s consisted of Danny committing more robberies and rapes, and he's arrested in several different states, including Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, and he actually manages to escape jail a few times.
Oh, gosh.
Not for very long.
Yeah.
I think his longest time out was 3 days.
Okay.
But, I mean, he's just in trouble all the time.
It's just a lot of trouble.
But in November of 1989, Danny's crimes took a much darker turn. He broke into a house in his hometown of Shreveport, and he murdered 55-year-old Tom Grissom, Tom's 24-year-old daughter, Julie, and his 8-year-old grandson, Sean.
No.
Julie's body had bite marks on it, and she was left posed on the bed in a sexual position. Now, police get no leads on this. This case just goes unsolved for years. They have no idea who would have done this.
I guess because it was so random?
Yeah, he didn't know these people. He had no connection to them. So there was nothing to link him to this family.
Yeah.
In May of 1990, he got into a fight with his father and shot him twice. Once in the abdomen and once in the head. Now, his father actually survived, though. Although he did lose an eye and an ear. I couldn't find any information on if Danny was actually charged with shooting his father.
That was my question.
If they even knew it was him. I'm not really sure.
Sounds like the guy deserved it, though, to be honest.
I mean, yeah.
But
now, after this, he stole the identification papers of Michael Kennedy, and hopped on a bus to Sarasota, Florida. Once he got there, he used the new assumed identity to check into a hotel and just started kind of setting up camp there. He lived in hotels. He would live in tents out in the woods. He didn't really have a place that he lived.
Okay. So he just kind of roamed around.
Yeah. On August 24th, 1990, Danny broke into the apartment shared by 17-year-old Sonia Larson and 17-year-old Christina Powell. Both girls were freshmen at the University of Florida. Now, when Danny gets in there, he sneaks past Christina, who's asleep on the couch.
Wow.
And he goes upstairs to Sonia's room. He proceeds to cover her mouth with duct tape, and then he stabs her to death.
Oh, my God.
He then goes back downstairs, where he tapes Christina's mouth closed and tapes her hands behind her. He then rapes her and makes her lay face down on the floor, and he stabbed her in the back several times, killing her.
My God. Now, did he know there were two girls there? For him to walk by Christina?
I don't think that I don't know. Maybe he canvassed the apartment first.
To see what was going on.
I didn't really see anything about whether or not he knew who was there. I assume he did.
Yeah.
He probably looked and knew with all his peeping Tom stuff.
Well, that's true. I didn't think about that. Okay.
So after he kills Christina, he actually goes back upstairs and rapes Sonia's body.
Ugh.
After this, he takes a shower and leaves the apartment.
Yeah, just use the facilities. No big deal.
Yeah. He was actually pretty careful. He would clean all the bodies with various chemicals and stuff, trying to keep his DNA and everything off of them.
Wow.
When the bodies were found, they found them mutilated and posed in very sexual positions as well.
Ugh.
The very next day, he breaks into the apartment of 18-year-old Krista Hoyt.
That is ballsy.
The next day. Now, Krista was a student at Santa Fe Community College, and she actually wasn't home when Danny broke in, so he waited for her.
Oh, I was going to say good, but no, I guess not.
Yeah, he sat around and waited for her to come home, and she finally does about 11 p.m.
Jeez.
Again, he bounds her with duct tape, he rapes her, and then he stabbed her to death. And in fact, he stabbed her with such force and violence that he actually ruptured her heart.
Oh my God, what?
And this one, if you're squeamish, maybe skip through this little next part. He actually is going for shock factor here with these bodies. That's why he's posing them.
That's what I'm thinking.
That's why he's mutilating them. So this is the worst one. So with Krista, he decapitates the body. He poses the body sitting upright on the edge of her bed.
His M.O.
He cut off her nipples and put them on the bed beside her.
Okay, that's new.
And then he puts her head on a bookshelf across the room facing her body.
God.
So at this point, he's committed 3 heinous rapes and murders in 2 days. And so obviously the news has spread through the town. The bodies were found very quickly.
Yeah.
And students begin traveling in groups. They're sleeping in groups. They're changing their schedules. They're carrying baseball bats. Tons of them just start going home.
That's the smart thing.
Yeah. Then on August 27th, which is just 3 days after the murders of Sonia and Christina, he breaks into the home of 23-year-old Tracy Paulus and 23-year-old Manny Taboda. And they were also students at the University of Florida. So this is where the whole college students being murdered in the Scream movies coming from.
Yeah.
Now, he attempts to stab and kill Manny while he's sleeping, but the young man wakes up and fights back.
Good.
But Danny actually finally does manage to overtake him and just keeps stabbing and stabbing until he finally dies.
Not good.
But all this commotion alerts Tracy. So she wakes up, she comes to see what's going on, and she sees Danny attacking Manny in his bedroom. And she runs and locks herself in her bedroom. But Danny manages to break in anyway.
Man.
He breaks the door down. He duct tapes her hands and mouth. He rapes her. Then he kills her by stabbing her 3 times in the back. Now, he poses Tracy's body. He leaves Manny where he is, but he doesn't mutilate either one of them. And that's because he was either interrupted or he felt pressured for time.
Okay.
So he stops after posing and leaves.
I wonder if he would have done Manny at all.
I'm not really sure.
That seems like a female thing.
Yeah, the other male victims, the original murders, he didn't pose the father. Now, at this point, all university classes are canceled for a week. Thousands of students leave Gainesville altogether. And over 700 of them never returned. People were terrified. And I can't blame them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go back to college if someone was murdering students.
Yeah. I don't think I would go back to college, period.
Yeah. Well, Danny, after this, escapes Gainesville. He gets on a bus. And he travels to the city of Ocala. And he is actually arrested there for burglary. He robbed a Winn-Dixie.
Of all the places to rob.
Right. And it's crazy to me that he has committed all these rapes and murders.
And he gets caught for burglary.
And he's arrested for robbing a Winn-Dixie. Now, it only takes about 4 months after his arrest for police to link him to the murders with his DNA.
Oh, so he wasn't cleaning as well as he thought.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
He thought he was doing a good job, but he just... No.
Yeah.
Danny ultimately pleads guilty to the charges almost 4 years later because he was already facing life sentences for the armed robberies and
why
everything.
not?
So I guess at this point he's like, what's the worst that could happen? Well, the worst that could happen was that he was sentenced to death.
Well.
And he's also diagnosed with just so many mental disorders.
I could see that.
He is also then linked to the triple homicide in Shreveport.
Oh, good.
And for years and years, he refuses to admit that he did it. They link it because of the similarities in the posing of Julia with all the college students.
Okay.
And right before his execution, he actually writes a letter and does confess to the murders.
Oh.
Now, while he's in jail, Danny actually collaborates with author Sandra London to write the book The Making of a Serial Killer, which discusses the murders, his motivations, how he coped in the aftermath.
Who cares how he copes?
And you can actually buy this book on Amazon. I went and found it. Like, you can
That
read.
might be my next read.
Yeah, the story by this terrible, terrible person.
Yeah.
On October 25th, 2006, Danny Rolling, now 52 years old, was executed via lethal injection. For his last words, he chose to sing a very long, 5-verse religious hymn that he either wrote ahead of time or made up on the spot.
Get out of here, Danny Rolling.
And he was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. So, like I said, the Scream movies, I never thought they were that scary.
Well, they're meant to be cheesy.
Right. But the actual story...
That's awful.
...is terrifying.
Yeah.
To know that there's people out there that can do stuff like this.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. That's scarier
And
than
not
any
even,
horror movie
not even
ever.
think twice about it. He just went hog wild in a week.
Yeah, all of this happened in a matter of 5 days.
Yeah. That's insane.
Wow.
Thanks for listening.
Like us on Facebook at True Crimes and Weird Times Podcast.
Follow us on Instagram at True Crimes Weird Times.
Email us your stories at truecrimesweirdtimes@gmail.com.
And if you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe and leave a review.
Bye.